When Reacher steps onto the set of Voices in Debate, the audience is ready for another intense and provocative conversation. But James Holloway isn't there for a friendly chat. He's there for a confrontation. Known for unsettling his guests with sharp provocations, Holloway sees Reacher's imposing style as an opportunity, a mystery to be unraveled, a personality to be challenged. But as Reacher settles into his chair, something changes. The power dynamic, which seemed obvious at first, begins to shift. Holloway leans forward, ready to strike. What he doesn't know is that at the end of this interview, it won't be Reacher who will be speechless, it will be him. And the whole world will be watching. Before we continue this story, tell us where you're watching from. And if you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we'll have another special story for you. The studio was buzzing with energy. Bright lights illuminated the modern stage, decorated with LED panels that flashed in shades of blue and gold, reflecting the show's sophisticated identity. The audience murmured eagerly, anticipating what was to come. Voices in Debate was a renowned talk show, renowned for its incisive approach, and its host, a man whose reputation for confronting his guests made him both fascinating and feared. In the center of the stage, James Holloway adjusted his tie with a discreet smile. Tall, with meticulously combed silver hair and piercing eyes, he was a master of provocation. His specialty? Pushing guests out of their comfort zone, forcing them to reveal truths they might prefer to keep hidden. The show's opening theme echoed through the speakers, and a wave of applause filled the studio. The camera approached Holloway, who spread his arms in a rehearsed theatrical gesture. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Voices in Debate." His voice was firm and full of confidence, dominating the atmosphere with ease. The show where we explore truths, deconstruct narratives, and put great minds to the test. The audience reacted enthusiastically. Every week, Vozes Debate brought influential figures, politicians, intellectuals, celebrities, and put them at the center of conversations that often made headlines the next day. But tonight's guest carried a special weight. He wasn't a controversial politician or a scandal-plagued star. He was an icon admired, respected, and at the same time shrouded in mystery. Holloway let the suspense hang for a moment before continuing. Our guest today is one of the most recognizable faces in television and film, a legendary actor, revered for his undeniable intensity and talent, but who remains intriguingly private. He rarely shares more than is necessary, but tonight, we intend to go beyond the surface. "Ladies and gentlemen, Reacher." The audience erupted in applause, and some spectators even stood up, showing their admiration. The camera moved to the side of the stage, where a dark curtain slowly began to open. Reacher emerged with his characteristic, confident posture. He was wearing a simple shirt and jacket, his presence strong and almost unbeatable. His blue eyes were fixed and calm, and he walked unhurriedly, as if he were completely in control of everything around him. He greeted the audience with a small, reserved smile before taking a seat opposite Holloway. He crossed his legs in a relaxed manner, showing total tranquility in the face of the expectations that filled the room. "Reacher," Holloway said, leaning forward slightly, his gaze sharp and attentive. "It's a pleasure to have you here." "It's my pleasure, James," Reacher replied, his voice calm but firm. The host studied his guest for a moment, like a chess player assessing his opening move. "You have a reputation as one of the toughest guys in Hollywood, a real mystery. Always quiet, always reserved, never involved in scandals. But honestly, Reacher, I believe there's a lot more to you than people realize." Reacher gave a subtle smile, tilting his head slightly. "I think we all have more layers than we show the world." "Absolutely," Holloway agreed, narrowing his eyes slightly. "And that's exactly what we're here to explore." There was a brief, deliberate pause. Then Holloway cast a discreet glance at the eagle tattoo visible on Reacher's neck. "Now, tell me." He made a subtle gesture in the direction of the tattoo. "You've never been particularly vocal about your beliefs, but here you are, sporting this striking symbol." Reacher's expression remained serene, but his fingers instinctively touched the tattoo, an unconscious gesture. The studio lights glowed softly, signaling the return of the commercial break. The audience, still murmuring in anticipation, looked forward to what was coming next. The Voices in Debate logo shone in the background as James Holloway leaned back in his chair, sporting a confident smile and the sharp gaze of someone who believed he was in control. This was his favorite part. The moment when he dismantled his guests, broke down their defenses and forced them to face uncomfortable territory. "All right, we're back," he announced, twirling a pen between his fingers with an almost dismissive air. Holloway stared at Reacher like a predator studying its prey. "Before the break, I asked you a simple question, Reacher. What does this symbol mean to you?" The audience fell silent. Some spectators leaned back in their chairs, eager to see how Reacher would handle the pressure. He ran his fingers over the eagle tattoo visible on his neck, rotating it slightly between them. His expression was calm, his posture unwavering. "This tattoo," he glanced quickly at the design, as if carefully weighing up his words. "It has a personal meaning for me." Holloway raised an eyebrow and let out a short, ironic laugh. "Personal?" he repeated, mockingly. "Oh, come on, Reacher. You're a public figure. Everything you show, everything you wear, conveys a message." Reacher remained impassive, but Holloway felt tension beginning to build under his stillness. The presenter leaned forward slightly, his tone imbued with condescension. "And let's face it," he pointed to the tattoo. "It's 2025. The world has changed. People have changed. And yet, here you are." His fingers pointed directly at the drawing, sporting an old-fashioned symbol. The provocation was direct. The audience tensed, sensing the growing hostility in Holloway's words. But Reacher's gaze remained fixed, unwavering. "Old-fashioned?" Holloway smiled out of the corner of his mouth, twisting the blade of the clash even more. "Yes, old-fashioned. Religion, faith, belief in invisible forces." He made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "I'm not a religious man, Reacher. I believe in reason, in progress. And frankly, I find it surprising that someone like you, modern, advanced, intelligent, still clings to something so old-fashioned." He laughed quietly, shaking his head, as if Reacher were a child who hadn't outgrown fairy tales. "Look, I understand when ignorant people, without access to knowledge, turn to faith. But you," Holloway arched an eyebrow, his eyes shining with obvious arrogance. "You've traveled the world, seen different cultures. I expected more from you." It was an insult disguised as false erudition. Some in the audience laughed nervously at Holloway's audacity, while others squirmed uncomfortably. Reacher, however, didn't react. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He didn't cringe under the weight of the presenter's words. He just watched Holloway with a calm, unchanging intensity. And then, finally, he spoke. "Interesting, James." His voice was firm, carrying a subtext of quiet strength. "You talk as if faith and intelligence were opposites." Holloway snorted, shaking his head. "Ah, come on, Reacher. Be honest. How many wars have been fought in the name of that symbol you carry? How many people have been persecuted, killed, condemned because of it?" Reacher ran his thumb over the tattoo, his gaze unchanged. "Do you want to debate history, or do you want to debate my symbol?" The audience reacted immediately. A collective murmur of surprise ran through the studio. Holloway narrowed his eyes, slightly annoyed. He wasn't used to being confronted so bluntly. He forced a laugh, but his fingers subtly squeezed the back of his chair. "Fair enough." His tone now carried a hint of disguised irritation. "So, I'll make it simple. Are you displaying this symbol as a statement? As a statement to the world?" It was a trap. If Reacher said yes, Holloway could accuse him of promoting a religious agenda. If he said no, he would look hypocritical for displaying a symbol without defending it. But once again, Reacher didn't fall for it. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying his host. And then he replied, "Are you wearing that expensive watch on your wrist as a statement, James? As a statement to the world?" A moment of silence, a second too long. The audience erupted in laughter. Reacher had turned the tables with total ease. Holloway clenched his jaw slightly, for a split second. He was no stranger to heated debates, but this was different. Reacher wasn't defending himself. He wasn't reacting with frustration or anger. He was just throwing back the same tactics Holloway used with his guests, and the audience was picking up on it. But Holloway wasn't going to let control slip out of his hands so easily. He leaned forward, slightly reducing his tone to something more incisive, almost threatening. All right, Reacher, let's cut to the chase. In a world driven by science, evolution, and technology, do you really believe that symbol on your chest still has a place? The provocation was no longer subtle. It was a direct challenge. The audience held its breath. Reacher opened his lips, ready to respond. And just then, the show's theme song began to play. Commercial break. Holloway smiled victoriously and turned to the camera. We'll be right back, guys. But believe me, this conversation is far from over. The show's music echoed through the studio once again, and the lights changed slightly, indicating the return after the break. James Holloway adjusted his tie and interlaced his fingers, sporting a smug smile. He believed he had Reacher cornered. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. His voice exuded the satisfaction of someone who already considered himself a winner. He turned to the camera, holding the audience's attention. Before the break, we left a question hanging in the air. A question that I think we all want answered. He turned to Reacher, his eyes sharp, waiting for a moment's hesitation, a slip. But Reacher didn't hesitate. On the contrary, he leaned forward slightly, calm, firm, with an enigmatic glint in his eye. James, if you don't mind, can I ask you a question? Holloway blinked, taken aback by the sudden reversal of roles. Of course, he smiled, although there was a slight tone of irony in his voice. Reacher studied him for a moment before speaking. What do you think evolution is? Holloway squinted, as if trying to anticipate a trap. Come on, Reacher. Evolution is progress. It's growth. It's about leaving behind outdated beliefs and moving towards a world guided by reason. Reacher nodded slowly, as if pondering the answer. So for you, evolving means abandoning everything that can't be measured in a laboratory? Holloway let out a dry laugh. Well, he spread his hands. If something can't be proven, then it's just an idea, right? Reacher kept his gaze steady, patient but unwavering. What about love? Holloway blinked. What about love? Love? Reacher's voice remained calm. Can you measure love, James? A murmur went through the audience. Some spectators crossed their arms, puzzled by the direction of the conversation. Holloway snorted, but this time there was a slight trace of discomfort in his expression. I don't know if I'm following. Reacher's voice remained steady. Does love? Holloway let out an impatient sigh. Of course it exists, but have you ever proved it scientifically? Have you held it in your hands? Have you put it under a microscope? The silence in the studio was absolute. For a brief moment, Holloway's expression changed. He realized where Reacher was leading the conversation. Oh, no. He waved his hand, letting out a forced laugh. You're not going to compare religion with love. I'm not comparing. Reacher's gaze remained firm. I'm asking, if something can't be scientifically proven, does that mean it has no value? The audience held its breath. Holloway blinked, momentarily bewildered. Reacher didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his expression. But his words carried a weight that filled the studio. James, you talk about faith as if it were a chain that imprisons people. But what if, for some, it's a bridge? What if, for me, this tattoo is not a symbol of control, but of freedom? Holloway opened his mouth to reply, but Reacher continued before he could interrupt. You mentioned wars, persecution. Yes, faith has already been distorted, turned into something harmful by those in power. But that doesn't erase the fact that, for millions of people, it has been a refuge, a light in the darkness. He rested his hand on the eagle tattoo. I don't wear it as a statement of superiority or dominance. I wear it as a reminder. Holloway kept his lips pressed together, his countenance hardened. Reacher stared directly at him. A reminder of humility, of compassion, a reminder that the world doesn't revolve around me. The silence stretched on. Then Reacher tilted his head slightly. And you, James? Holloway frowned. What about me? Reacher's voice remained low, but his question fell with the weight of a hammer. Do you believe in something bigger than yourself? The studio fell even quieter. The question hit Holloway like a blow. He tensed his shoulders for a brief moment, a split second long enough for the cameras to catch it. He took a deep breath, pulling himself together. We're not here to talk about me. Reacher gave a small, almost complicit smile. Maybe we should. Holloway's eyes became darker. Reacher leaned back in his chair. Because when someone reacts so hostily to a symbol, it usually means that there's something about it that bothers them. Holloway's jaw twitched. For the first time that night, James Holloway was on the defensive. And the audience noticed. The studio was absolutely silent, everyone completely immersed in the verbal clash unfolding in front of them. James Holloway had always been comfortable on his own show. He knew how to conduct an interview, how to dominate a conversation. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. And that infuriated him. He took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, trying to regain his balance. But his eyes now carried a dangerous glint. He couldn't afford to lose this debate. "Well done, Reacher." Holloway forced a smile. But now there was a subtle venom in his tone. He spoke eloquently about humility, compassion, about how this symbol represents freedom, not control. Then he leaned forward, his gaze penetrating. "But tell me something. What about all the people who have suffered under this symbol? What about those who have been judged, condemned, divided in its name? You bear this symbol on your chest, but do you understand the weight it carries?" The audience held its breath. Reacher didn't flinch. He didn't fidget in his chair. He just smiled slightly. "You talk as if the symbol itself is to blame, James." Holloway narrowed his eyes. "Isn't it?" Reacher let out a quiet sigh, his fingers brushing the eagle tattoo on his neck once more. If one person uses a hammer to build a house and another uses the same hammer to break windows, he looked at Holloway. Is it the hammer's fault or the person holding it? The audience murmured, visibly impressed. Holloway's face darkened. "Nice metaphor, Reacher." He shook his head, trying to disguise his frustration. "But we're talking about reality, history, Christianity, religion. They've been responsible for countless wars, oppression, discrimination. They have suffered in your name," Holloway insisted. "And yet here you are, wearing that symbol as if it were just an accessory." Reacher didn't react immediately. He just tilted his head slightly, studying Holloway with a calm and perceptive gaze. "James, do you believe in justice?" Holloway frowned. "Of course I do." Reacher nodded slowly, reflecting. "And yet, how many injustices have been committed in the name of justice?" There was a pause. The audience stirred, sensing the change in the conversation. Holloway blinked, suspicious. "What are you getting at?" Reacher's voice remained serene, firm, unwavering. "People have done terrible things in the name of justice. But that doesn't mean that justice itself is bad. It means that even the purest ideals can be corrupted." He allowed the words to sink in before continuing. "It's the same with faith." Holloway's jaw twitched. Reacher leaned forward a little, keeping his gaze fixed on the presenter. "If some people have used faith as a weapon, the problem isn't with the faith. It's in the hands that wielded it." A murmur reverberated through the studio. Reacher's words fell like thunder. Holloway forced a laugh. "So you're saying that faith is innocent? That religion bears no responsibility for the damage it has caused?" Reacher shook his head. "I'm saying that faith is like fire. It can warm a home or burn it down. But fire in itself is neither good nor bad. It all depends on how people use it." Another pause. Holloway pressed his lips together, clearly feeling the tide turning against him. For the first time that night, he didn't have an answer ready. Reacher watched him for a moment, then softly added, "Maybe the real question isn't what faith did. Maybe the real question is, why does it bother you so much?" The impact was immediate. The audience tensed. Holloway froze for a split second. "What's it like?" His voice came out a little lower than usual. Reacher held his gaze. "You keep attacking faith, James. But have you ever asked yourself why? Why the idea of belief bothers you so much?" The studio was plunged into absolute silence. This time, it wasn't the expectant silence of before, but something deeper, heavier. James Holloway, the man who had built his career dominating debates, dismantling guests with contradictions and uncertainties, was now on the defensive, and he hated it. Reacher had turned the tables. The audience felt it. Holloway felt it, but he would never admit it. He forced a laugh, adjusted his tie, and leaned back slightly in his chair, trying to regain the illusion of control. "Clever, Reacher. I'll give you that." His voice maintained its composure, but his fingers gripped the back of the seat a little harder, turning the question against me. Nice trick. But let's be clear, this isn't about me. Reacher's face remained impassive. His posture was still relaxed, as if he had all the time in the world. Isn't it? Holloway snorted, shaking his head. I'm not the one sitting here displaying a religious symbol. I'm not the one promoting a belief system in front of millions of people. Reacher raised an eyebrow. Promoting? Holloway gestured towards Reacher's eagle tattoo, which he often wore. Call it what you will. But when someone like you, an influential public figure, takes to the stage wearing something like that, you're sending a message. Whether you admit it or not, you're endorsing something. Reacher tilted his head slightly. So, if someone wears a rainbow flag, they're also endorsing something? The studio fell silent. It was a simple question, but its weight spread throughout the room. Holloway hesitated for a moment, a second too quick for most to notice. But Reacher noticed. Holloway recovered quickly. That's different. His voice came out firmer. Reacher kept his gaze serene. A rainbow flag represents inclusion, equality. And don't you think faith can represent the same? Reacher's voice was calm, but his words had a sharp impact. The audience leaned forward, absorbing every moment. Holloway's jaw dropped. Faith has already been used to exclude, Reacher, to justify hatred. You can't deny that. Reacher nodded slowly. Just like governments, so have ideologies. Just like science. Virtually every belief system in history has been used as a weapon at some point. He paused briefly before concluding. And yet, we don't erase them completely. We refine them. We learn. We evolve. He looked directly at Holloway. So why is faith the only thing you think should be erased? The studio became even more tense. The audience sensed the change. James Holloway was losing ground. And for the first time that night, he knew it. He needed to regain control. All right, let's put philosophy aside and talk about reality. Holloway leaned forward, his tone now sharper. Do you really believe that in the modern world, with all the knowledge and advances we've made, people still need faith? Reacher didn't hesitate. Yes, a simple, firm answer. Holloway's eyes narrowed. Why? Reacher inhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. Because logic alone does not fill the human soul. The audience went still. Reacher continued, his voice calm but unwavering. We live in the information age. We can explain the stars, cure diseases, connect instantly with anyone, anywhere. He paused. And yet, we've never been lonelier. More anxious, more lost. Reacher raised his eyes to Holloway. The answers we find are no substitute for the meaning we seek. Holloway leaned back slightly, his expression indecipherable. So you're saying that faith gives meaning to people's lives? Reacher nodded. For some, yes. For me, yes. And I think that's something that deserves respect, even if it doesn't for you. Holloway let out a sigh, shaking his head. Respect. That's an interesting word, because there are those who say that religion has done more harm than good. Reacher didn't reply. He just acknowledged the statement with a subtle nod. Some would say that. Holloway's eyes lit up. He sensed an opening. And what would you say to them? Reacher's gaze remained steady. His answer came quietly, but loaded with meaning. I would say that pain is not exclusive to faith. Human beings are flawed, James. We make mistakes. We correct mistakes. But if we focus only on what was done wrong, we ignore everything that was done right. Love, hope, kindness, all. That also came from faith. But faith lived by those who understand its true meaning, and not by those who distort it. The studio was plunged into absolute silence. For the first time, Holloway had no answer. His lips compressed into a thin line. The moment dragged on, and everyone in the audience noticed. James Holloway, the master of provocation, was out of angles, out of options. For the first time in a long time, he didn't have a counter-argument. He had lost. The weight of the silence in the studio was unlike any before. James Holloway, always the dominant force in any conversation, now found himself sitting in front of Reacher, visibly overcome. For the first time in his career, there was nothing to say. And the audience sensed it. A realization began to spread through the studio. This wasn't just an interview, it was a change. Reacher remained motionless, serene, his presence solid as an anchor in the middle of the storm. Then a sound broke the silence. First, a single round of applause, then another. And suddenly, the entire studio rose to its feet in an unexpected ovation. The sound filled the room, reverberating through the studio walls. Reacher hadn't just responded to the taunts. He had disarmed each one with calm and conviction. James Holloway, still sitting, still processing, glanced at the cameras. He could see the headlines forming in real time. He had lost, and he knew it. Forcing a strained smile, Holloway cleared his throat, trying to keep his composure. "Well, Reacher," his voice carried a slight trace of hesitation. "I have to admit, I didn't expect this conversation to take this turn." Reacher's eyes remained calm, understanding, but without giving in. "Conversations often reveal more than we plan, James." Holloway drummed his fingers on the back of his chair, a nervous tick. "That's true." He laughed softly, but without any real humor. "I suppose now is the time for me to thank you for your thoughts and your time." Reacher nodded. "It's been a pleasure." And the way he said it, genuine but firm, it was clear. This was not a victory that Reacher had sought, but it was still a victory. The world was watching. Within minutes of the episode being broadcast, excerpts from the interview flooded social media. Reacher's name dominated the trending topics. Memes, reaction videos, analysis. Every moment of the clash was being debated and shared. But this time, it wasn't just another viral phenomenon. It was a change in perception. James Holloway sat alone in his dressing room, watching the impact unfold before his eyes. The interview was everywhere. Newspapers, talk shows, commentators were echoing the conversation. Some called the moment the night Holloway met his match. Others labeled it the most important fight of the year. Holloway clenched his jaw as he scrolled down his Twitter timeline. #Reacher1 was the most talked about topic. Critics, celebrities, and public figures praised Reacher's calmness and steadfastness. But the worst part wasn't just that Reacher had stood his ground. It was that Holloway had been exposed. His usual tactics, the sharp provocations, the calculated condescension, the relentless need to trap his guests had failed, and everyone saw it coming. For the first time in his career, James Holloway wasn't the one controlling the conversation, and he hated it. Meanwhile, Reacher left the studio without a fuss. No victory speeches, no triumphant declarations, no interviews. He just shook a few hands, waved to the team, and left. Outside, a crowd of reporters waited, microphones raised, firing questions. "Reacher, how do you feel about the interview? Do you think Holloway was unfair? What was the message you wanted to convey?" Reacher didn't answer. He just smiled softly, got into his car, and disappeared into the night. His silence spoke louder than any answer could. Days later, Reacher finally broke his silence. A single post on his social networks. No long speeches, no detailed explanations. Just a simple message. We don't have to agree to respect each other. We don't need to believe the same things to walk together. Post went viral instantly. Because, at the end of the day, it wasn't about religion. It wasn't about winning a debate. It was about understanding. And that's why Reacher had won. Because, in the end, it wasn't about the argument. It was about the conversation. That was the intense and memorable interview between Reacher and James Holloway, a clash of ideas that revealed much more than simple arguments. But now, I want to know, what did you think of this conversation? Do you believe that faith and reason can coexist, or do you think that one will always override the other? Leave your opinion in the comments. I really want to know what you think. And if this story has made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who would love this debate and could benefit from this message. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and make us see the world with new eyes. Want to continue immersing yourself in impactful stories? Click on one of the videos that appear on the screen and discover another fascinating narrative that will hold your attention until the very last second. See you in the next video.